Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Journeys to Belonging. On today's podcast, my very special guest is someone that I think so highly of. I'm currently reading her book, which we'll talk about during the podcast. And just so excited to have you here, Mandy Froehlich.
Thank you so much for having me. I was so excited when you asked. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Mandy, I want to start over again. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Journeys to Belonging. On today's podcast, I have such a special guest, and I'm currently reading her book, which we're definitely going to be talking about, amongst other things. And her topic of her book and the things that she's so passionate about are really important for these days. And so, Mandy Froehlich, I'm so excited to have you on my podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So I didn't really say too much, except enticing our listeners that you've got this book and you've got all kinds of topical things. So tell us more about you.
Sure. So I started out in education as an elementary teacher, and I moved from the classroom after becoming burnt out in the classroom. I moved from the classroom to being a tech integrator. And then the natural progression of that was to move into a director of innovation and technology. And I sort of had the foresight to retire from that right prior to the pandemic.
Wow. That is foresight. Yeah.
I had been consulting on the side for many years, and it just felt like kind of a natural progression to move into consulting full time. Because it was really difficult, my passion area and where I was doing the most consulting actually wasn't in tech, even though I did a lot of that as well. It was, as you know, because you're reading one of my books, in Educator mental health. And so I've been consulting, continuing to write books. I wrote my first couple of books when I was still a tech director, but 3 of those books are on Educator mental health. So The Fire Within and Reignite the Flames are the first 2 in that series. And then there's also a workbook that's a companion book to Reignite the Flames that's called The Educator's Matchbook. And so that's just supposed to be a very practical, way to implement the things that I talk about in Reignite the Flames. And then what was essentially my second book, but it's not exactly in the mental health area, is DivergentEDU. And that one is based on an organizational structure I developed for supporting teachers in innovative thinking, which has actually impacted quite a bit my mental health. And so that's how I weaved that one into there.
Nice.
And outside of consulting, I work for EduMatch Publishing as the director of author success. I teach a technology and leadership course, a graduate course through one of our universities. I work with like some ed tech companies. And so what I do is sort of vast as far as the ground I cover between technology and mental health. But it really allows, I'm doing something different every single day, and I get to work with districts, which is really where my passion is. And so it's a lot of fun.
Amazing. And when do you have time to sleep?
Well, I make sure I get in my 8 hours because that is super important.
Yes. Yeah. If we're talking mental health, that, self-care, sleep is one of the healing ways that we can take care of ourselves. Oh, Mandy, absolutely. I can't wait to get to talk to you about, there's so many things that I want to find out more about. So the first question I always ask my guests is, if I say the word belonging or feeling a sense of belonging, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Sure. I think that the concept of belonging is really interesting, because I think when we look at it, if we really dig down into some of our feelings and emotions we have over certain situations, it'll actually come down to a feeling of belonging. And when I first started noticing this a few years ago, it came to me as an adult. Like I felt it as a kid. Everybody feels it when, if you're not exactly part of the popular group or, but you don't know what it is as a kid. You don't understand that that's belonging. But it came to me about how important it was a few years ago when I felt left out of a group that had been invited to a conference. And now this seems kind of, in the grand scheme of things, it seems kind of lame, right? Or like, it's essentially the adult version of being invited to the party, right?
Yeah. Yes.
But
it's important. It's important. It has to do with our self-esteem. Go ahead.
Yep, absolutely. And when that happened, I was so irritated, and even irritated. I with misplaced irritation over the people that were invited. And so I really had to sit down, and a lot of times when I have big emotions like that, I've learned to sit down and figure out what the root cause is, because it's usually not what it seems like it is at the surface.
True.
And at that time I had sat down and I'm like, what is my problem? What is going on right now? And it really came down to the feeling like I was left out, and which is, of course, belonging. And, and then so I had to reason through that and say, but I do belong to that group. And if I want to go, I should go. It doesn't matter if I was invited or, like in that capacity or not. And so, but I did have to reason through that. And it's, like you said, it's very much back to your self-esteem, very much back to your self-worth. Was I not good enough to go to that conference? Have I not worked hard enough to go to that conference? Have I not put myself out on social media enough? And so you start asking those questions that are very almost kind of leads. I recently wrote a blog post about self-abuse. Some of them kind of lead back to self-abuse.
Yes.
Oh, I'm not good enough for this, and I'm not smart enough for this, and I'm not popular enough for this. And so I really think that sense of belonging is one of the most foundational emotions that messes with us, that we may not even know that that's what the core problem is.
Yeah, absolutely. I love all that you said. It's the idea of, it pokes a hole and gives us that self-doubt. So it makes us start questioning, it's that imposter syndrome. And what have I done to create or contribute to the fact that I didn't make it? But I think it's wonderful. And I definitely want to sort of delve in deeper about what you're doing now in order to unpack those feelings. So I'm going to take you in that direction rather than the direction I had originally thought, but we'll get back to what I was going to ask. Is how did you come to the point where you understood that you needed to unpack those big feelings and figure out what the root of it was?
I think that that's something that I've developed over the course of time, when I figured out that I really spent a lot of time in negative emotions and being unhappy. And it does go back a little bit to like the book you're reading, The Fire Within. The Fire Within was one of the catalysts for that, was my burnout and disengagement from teaching and trying to come back from that. And I can, as I've said before, wanting to come back from burnout, and be a better teacher, it could have been from the desire to really support students. And there was a bit of that. And it could have been for the desire to support teachers better. And there was a bit of that. But what it actually was just the foundational desire to be happy as a human. That's all it was. I was tired of being negative. I was tired of being angry. I was tired of complaining. Like, I was just tired of all of that. I was tired of being tired of all of that. Were you
tired of hearing yourself be like that?
I was.
Yeah.
And I was also tired of feeling it and putting it on to other people, which was another thing that change in energy that happens when you complain to somebody and they feel like you're complaining all the time. There's an energy exchange with that.
Yes.
And I was tired of that.
Yeah.
And I started to do a lot of research into mental health, and I had dealt with my own anxiety and done like tons of counseling and for depression and suicidal ideation and all of these things. And what I realized through all that was that the core issue with just about anything is not always what it seems on the surface.
Right.
And there is so much, I guess, practice and self-reflection and self-awareness that has to happen in order to get to a place where you can say, I'm feeling something because of something I'm doing, not because of something else somebody's doing to me.
Right.
Because honestly, if there's something really terrible that somebody's doing to you, well, what boundary are you not setting to allow that to happen? And so there's a lot of self-reflection that has to happen with that. And yet I found that when I go down that road and I take the time to really find out what it is, I can heal much faster, and I can use the strategies I've developed in order to move forward. And I don't fall into that, kind of self-abuse, that negative behavior. I still do a lot of, for example, emotional eating. That's been my thing to try to break lately. To try and figure out, what am I eating because I'm hungry and what am I eating because I'm emotional. But I know I've worked enough to know to be able to dig into those core areas. And it's a really powerful healing tool when it comes down to it, for people to be able to do that.
Yeah. And the thing is, what you were saying for the story that you told at the beginning when I asked you about belonging was, although you felt left out, you looked at that after you sort of unpacked everything and said, but I can still go. I may not have been invited, but that doesn't stop me from. And what happens is, because I suffered from depression for a very, very long time. And so I know where you're coming from. And when you're in that negative space with that black curtain sort of shining, right in front of you, you don't see any opportunities. And so if you don't unpack what's actually really bothering you, and I love the fact that you mentioned, what is it that I'm doing? Not what are people doing to me, which is always a difficult thing for us to sort of admit.
Right.
And so that, so many points there that I really related to, and I think everybody will. So tell us a little bit about your book, Reignite the Flames, and when did you publish it, and how does it relate to what we're going through right now? Because I know you're very concerned about mental health in general for educators.
Sure. So, well, The Fire Within was, I think I published that I think it was 2017. I'm really bad with remembering years, but I think it was 2017. And I was really with that book, I was really trying to destigmatize mental health, with educators in particular. I know that in the community in general, it needs to be destigmatized, but in particular with educators, because we work with kids. And if we're depressed, are our students going to catch it from us? Like some of these ridiculous notions that are just not going to happen. And so that was really, The Fire Within. But what I wanted to write was, and I wrote The Fire Within and DivergentEDU in tandem. I wrote them at the same time, because, and this is one of the things that I do, that helps me write, that gets rid of sort of the writer's block, is to actually write two books in tandem. Because when I get writer's block with one book, I move on to the other book. So
that's so interesting.
And then and then I'll write that one for a little while, and then I'll get writer's block with that one, and I'll move back to the other one. So those two were released within months of each other.
Okay.
And then I really wanted something that was going to be more of a step-by-step guide to moving out of the area of disengagement. And I also wanted to actually define disengagement, because I noticed that when I used that term with educators, they got a little like flutter in their heart. Like they got a little irritated with me because they're like, I'm doing all the things. I'm working so many hours a week, and I'm volunteering for all this. My students can call me on my cell phone. They would get very defensive. And I said, no, like disengagement isn't disengagement isn't about how much time you put into professional development. It's not about how many hours you work. It's not about what you do. It's about how much you love what you do. And so I really needed to define what that was. And I used, I went into some psychological terms with like, emotional engagement and what that looks like, and emotional disengagement. And I tried to discuss, that there's kind of this, I usually compare two different teachers, that the teacher that is kind of like flustered and running around and is runs every club in the school and is the head of the sunshine committee and is the teacher in charge when the principal leaves. And
we
she's
all know
all of these
somebody
people.
like that. Yes.
Yeah, we all know that person, right?
Yeah.
Every school has one.
Yeah.
And but also how she's going home, or she or he's going home crying to their partner at night, or regularly looking for another job, or thinking that if they move schools, it'll be different. When it's really not about the school or the district they're in. It's a lot of times it's about them, and them not having, boundaries of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate to fit on their plate. And that to me is a disengaged teacher, even though they're doing all the things. It doesn't matter how much they're working. Working more does not make you better.
Not only that, doesn't make you happy.
Right, exactly. And then I usually kind of compare it to the teacher who has studied mindfulness and understands how to regularly put that, incorporate that into their practice, that they are still a smart person. So they are still the administrator in charge, but they don't head the Sunshine Committee. They just are a part of the Sunshine Committee, that they don't go to all of the, athletic events that the students have, or the musical events that the students have, that they go to the ones that they want to go to, maybe, but that they do everything with passion and happiness. And that is an engaged teacher. And I really wanted people to be able to see the difference, because at one point I was a very engaged teacher and I loved my job and I was doing things well. I started working too hard because I started to get into the more is better mindset. And that's where I became burnt out. And so I really wanted to provide people with the information that they needed. Why do we disengage? It's not only burnout. I've actually identified several other reasons why we disengage. Things like, personal or professional adversity, secondary traumatic stress, the things I typically call teacher trauma, which can be anything from, super unfortunate situation where a student passes away, to some of the ways that we do active shooter drills in the US, so we have teacher trauma, we have secondary traumatic stress. What am I missing? We have burnout, and we have demoralization. And so I introduce all of those, and I tried to give examples of things like, burnout's really popular right now. And everybody says, everybody's burnt out,
Yes.
But not everybody is burnt out. There are some people who are actually what we would call demoralized. And so, burnout is you have too many things piled on your plate and you haven't set clear boundaries. You're doing too much work. You're working harder, not smarter. Demoralization is actually when you have teachers get into teaching with this moral obligation to do better, right? If we want to change the world, literally, that is why we get into education. And when that moral obligation is challenged through things like pandemics, if I'm a teacher where I identify with my ability. Like when I say I'm a teacher, what that means to me is that I can create the best relationships with students face to face. I hug every second grader that comes up to me. It doesn't matter if it's the 150th time that they've done it that day.
Yeah.
I have created relationships with students. Like if that's how I identify, and I can't do that right now because of the pandemic, I could become demoralized.
Sure.
That's how I identify I'm
Right.
getting my moral obligation challenged. So the reason that I talk about those two things, I usually bring those two up, is because if you are burnt out, you need to pull back. You need to take things off your plate. You need to, set clear boundaries. You need to
Right.
take time for yourself. You
Mm-hmm.
need to practice heavy self-care. But demoralization is actually about leaning in and figuring out who you identify as an educator, how you identify as an educator in the situation that you're in, and how
Sure.
you can really dig into your professional passions and purpose in order to make the best out of what's happening. So if people continue to say I'm burnt out and they continue to pull back, but they're actually demoralized, they're not going to be working on the correct problem. And
Right.
those are really some of the things that I wanted to address in Reignite the Flames, because I wanted people to have the words to use to describe how they were feeling. So
Yeah.
that's sort of the story of how Reignite the Flames came to be.
Yeah. It's so important to define what the problem is.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way that you're going to be able to define what the problem is to know what that looks like. We're so busy as educators, either in the classroom or as tech support or as coaches or helping each other. The different problems we have with this is in general, not even during a pandemic when things are changing
Mm-hmm.
constantly. And actually being able to step back and reflect and just say to ourselves, gee, what's bothering me, is almost like I don't have the time to do that. But the problem
Mm-hmm.
is going in day after day, like you said, not having defined what the problem is, thinking that you're burned out and doing too much, pulling back and then figuring out, no, what I needed to do was such and such, was figure out the fact that I'm missing my students. I'm not really
Mm-hmm.
engaging with them. I don't have those same relationships with them. I'm not, hugging them.
Mm-hmm.
It's huge. And you see
Mm-hmm.
that on, I'm sure you do too. You see educators mentioning it in their social media posts day after day after day. And I bet what you want to do is be able to reach out to them and say, you've got, your finger on the wrong problem.
Yep.
So that's really interesting how the two books sort of followed after each other. And now you've got the follow-up, which is, I guess, sort of a workbook toward being able to figure that out on a
Mm-hmm.
regular basis. So helping teachers with their reflections. So talk a little bit about the book that you came out with, sort of that workbook.
Sure. Well, and kind of going back a little bit to what you just said, like there's two things that I am like a really kind of two ideas that I'm a big fan of, I guess. And one of those is that in order to move forward in healing, you have to be able to name your emotions. And I see that as a big issue with kids.
We
we
talk
don't
about it for
say to
kids, but we don't really think
yep.
that as adults we need to do that also. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. And so, like one of the things that I've done in schools when I've gone in kind of just, when I've seen an issue and I've been in a classroom, because I'm usually there to work with teachers, is are these students who have these huge emotions and they don't know how to name them. And you have to be able to name an emotion. And then I used to have a counselor who told me all the time, you have to feel to heal. You have to be
Yeah,
able to feel the emotion and work through it. And
right.
so a lot of times what we're doing is kids are frustrated. We don't help them name that frustration. Like we don't have, we don't say to them, like, tell me how you're feeling. Can you describe how you're feeling? Oh my gosh, that's frustration. That's what we call
Yes,
frustration.
right.
And oh, that can just sometimes make us so mad, can't it? And then let the child understand what that is and help them work through it instead of saying, just stop feeling that way.
Yeah. And
We
what's
do that
causing it, what the root cause of it is, like you were saying from the beginning. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And then as adults, we do that same thing. We have an emotion, and instead of working through that emotion, we shove it down into whatever compartment we have created for that moment, to try to just get through what we're doing and not seem like we're weak or incapable or whatever it is. We just shove that sucker down and lock the box. And we
don't want our admin to see it. We don't want our colleagues to see it. We're worried about it affecting our students. Yeah.
1,000%. So we do that, and then we never take it back out of the box to really look at it and say, okay, what can I do with this? Like, how can I work through it and feel it? And sometimes that means sitting on your bed and crying. And sometimes that looks like getting really angry and trying to work through those angry emotions. And sometimes that looks like journaling, and sometimes it looks like meditation. Whatever it is, you can't use the strategies you develop if you don't feel the emotion and then know that you have to work through it. And so everything that you just said is really important, because you have to be able to, we have to be able to work through the emotions. We have to know those strategies so that we can teach kids to use them too. So that
we should be able to model them also.
Right. Yeah. And, I remember one time, something had happened in my classroom. I can't remember what it was. And I went through, right before I left the classroom, I had the best class ever, that one class where you're like, I am going to love these kids forever. Like they, and I was so fortunate to be able to loop with them from 4th to 5th grade. So I had them 2 years, this amazing class. And I remember one time I got really, really frustrated, with something that was just going wrong with technology or something like that. And I can't remember what it was. And I remember saying to them, I'm feeling very angry right now. I'm super frustrated because I can't get this working. And I remember a couple of my kids who heard me say it, they said, why, Mrs. Froehlich? They're like, when we get frustrated, we just take some deep breaths. And they gave me the, the teacher version of how to get through being frustrated.
I love it. Yay.
And they ended it with, let us help you. And it was such a moment where I was like, we don't give kids nearly enough credit for some of the things that they do and they say.
We do not.
And it was just a really powerful moment for me to recognize, and
a powerful moment for them. I'm sure they'll never forget it.
Yeah, they were a great class. But the book that I had developed off from Reignite the Flames, I think it was about 6 months that I released it after Reignite the Flames. And what had happened was I had a friend of mine, she came to me and she said, so I was talking to so-and-so from our district, a teacher from our district that I had left. And she said, I love everything Mandy writes, but I know I'm disengaged and I don't know how to fix it. She's like I read all of her books and it is it's giving me,
but I don't know what to do.
But I don't know what to do. And I don't know where to even start implementing some of the things that she's talking about. And it was really a wake-up call for me, because I was still living on the high of, I released a book and it's so practical and everybody's gonna be able to use it. Yeah. And that wasn't true.
Oops, I missed something.
Yeah. Right, exactly. So so the Educator's Matchbook can be used as a standalone book. I tried to put enough information in there that people can use it in order to move forward. Sure. But it's a week-by-week guide that does things like, it talks about the 4 types of self-care. It talks about different things that you can do for self-care. What does that mean? Not only the making sure that you're getting exercise, but also taking care of your diabetes if that's a problem, or everything from going to the dentist. Those are all self-care type things. And then it has a place to help you set boundaries. There's an emotion tracker in it so that you can kind of track your emotions throughout the week to try to get a handle on, if I'm looking back and I had a really hard time in January, did I also have a hard time last January? Because if I did, it's not that the problem is less, but the catalyst may have been the time of year.
Interesting. Yeah.
So there's kind of that emotion tracker in there. There's also a place to set goals, and that's sort of on one page. There's another page for reflection on the week. And then built within the weeks, there are mindfulness activities, gratitude activities. There's a gratitude journal, a mindfulness journal. I'm trying to think what else is in there. There's resilience activities, and then there's a teacher activity. And the teacher activity is everything from how to create like a joy box or a joy kit in the classroom and what that does for you, to reflecting on things like the first time you stepped in your classroom, or what are your passions and purposes really. And so it gives some of those elements that I had to work through in order to come back from my own disengagement. And that's kind of what the Educator's Matchbook is.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's so much material. I mean, there are so many tidbits. I'll be sure to put the links to the books and all of the books in the show notes for everybody, to make sure that if they want to go ahead and take a look and definitely purchase them, because they're so practical. So in your background notes to me, you mentioned that, and we're still talking sort of the whole idea of mental health, but you mentioned something that you really consult about, or that you're passionate about, is the impact of mental health on innovation. And I don't know that I've really connected those two things. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and what the consulting work that you do with that?
Yeah, I get asked this all the time, because people say, well, what do you consult on? And I'll say, well, I mostly consult on technology and innovation and mental health. And they're like, what now? Kind of like one of those, was that Sesame Street? Like one of these
Are they
things
separate or what? Yes.
Yeah. And usually what, I'll kind of respond right away with is, well, obviously technology definitely has an impact on mental health, no matter how you look at it. And it can be a good, if you use technology very intentionally, and you're watching your balance, and you're working with the digital wellness and watching your balance, and using meditation apps and exercise apps, like obviously it can have a positive impact as well.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
But we also know about cell phone addiction, and we know about those types of things too. So it can go either way. But as far as mental health and innovation goes, so we know it goes one way. We know it goes technology to mental health, but going the other way from mental health to innovation, if we have, if we are suffering from anxiety, or even the feeling of a lack of belonging, or if we have depression, or any of the disengagement things, we are super incredibly overwhelmingly stressed because I have to go home every night and take care of my ailing mother, whatever it is.
Right.
You only have a certain capacity to be able to put energy toward a certain thing. And if you are putting all of your energy toward that thing, you are not going to have the freedom to think innovatively, because thinking innovatively is, you have to think of things that are new and different and be creative. And that takes a lot of energy, a lot of positive, amazing energy.
A lot of brain space too.
Yes, a lot of brain space. Exactly. Yes. And, but if I am, I give an example, I think it's in Fire Within, where there was a period of time that my depression was terrible as a tech director. And I worked so hard all day long to be quote unquote normal, that at the end of the day, when people left, I just put my head down and cried. And because I was suffering from depression, but it wasn't sadness. It was exhaustion. It was pure exhaustion from being overwhelmed from trying to play normal all day long. There is no innovative thinking in that.
Yes.
There is no way that I'm picking my head up from that desk and wiping my tears and going, all right, let me iterate something new like that.
Yes, you're right. Yeah. And we sort of laugh about it, but it is a very serious problem. We need to create that space for that to happen. And nobody expects us to be normal all the time. That isn't normal.
Right. And before, kind of prior to the pandemic, one of the questions that I got from administrators the most was, how do I make my teachers be more innovative? That was kind of like almost the number one question I was asked. And I would always say, first of all, you don't make your teachers do anything.
That's true. Or you shouldn't think that you can.
Right. Yeah. You can support them and lift them up, but you're not going to make them. Because the second you tell me you're going to make me do something, that term, like, you're not the boss of me, comes to mind, and I shut down, I'm done. But I would usually say to them, what is your climate and culture like? What are your
Very
teachers? Like, are they disengaged? Like, are they complaining a lot? Do they leave and stand out in your parking lot and talk? And it's probably not about their kids. It's their own kids. It's probably about their students and the administration and the culture and other teachers. Because if they're so caught up in the feelings of not belonging, anxiety from the climate and culture, feeling like they're disengaged, maybe a depression,
feeling unappreciated, unrecognized.
Yes. Yes.
Having things happening outside the school. Personally or whatever.
Yep. Absolutely. They're not going to be thinking innovatively. And it's really, it feels, when you first say innovative and, thinking innovatively in mental health, it feels like a jump. It's not that far, because you only have the capacity to do so much in one day. And, so that is, when I talk about innovation in mental health specifically, if you want to address innovation in your schools, you are going to first take a look at your climate and culture, how engaged your students are, how supportive your leadership is. And then, only then, are you going to be able to start saying, well, we do support teachers enough to be thinking innovatively.
Yeah. So I have a question then. In terms of what we're going through right now, that's now going on for almost a year, and the fact that, I know, it's hard to believe, and the fact that what I keep hearing is, let's reimagine education, let's reinvent education, let's learn from what works, what doesn't work, what we've been through, and let's create something different. If we're talking about everybody or educators being exhausted, overwhelmed, disengaged, demoralized, and not being able to innovate, how do we put that all back together? So I'm asking you for advice. What should we really be doing now? And we, the greater we, meaning educators, policymakers, what should we be looking at in order to create that better education? And I imagine, because you're in school districts and you are consulting and giving professional development, you have your finger on the pulse. What kinds of things are you seeing and hearing, and what direction should we be taking? Because there are a lot of conversations going on, but I don't see a lot happening. How can we sort of get ourselves going? It's a big question, I know, but I know you, and I'm sure you have a way to sort of put it together and give us some direction at least.
Sure. There are, I agree, there are a lot of conversations happening. And I think one of the reasons why there hasn't been as much change as I think people would like to see is because the reason that we went to the kind of learning that we did, that disrupted education as much as it did, was because of a pandemic, which has a lot of other emotions going on.
Sure.
not only the demoralization, but I mean, people legitimately have family members passing away and other very personal issues happening. I mean, they're afraid of getting sick. I have a senior in high school, and she is legitimately afraid of getting sick. And I do not downplay her being scared of this. The fact of the matter is that we're living in a pandemic where if you get the virus, you could get a cold or you could die, and you don't know until you get it.
Sure.
And so
Absolutely.
I don't blame anybody for being absolutely terrified. And so I think one of the reasons that we haven't moved forward with some of these things that we feel could make such a difference from this disruption is because, like you said, people are exhausted and overwhelmed. And I do talk a lot about disengagement. I do want to be clear that there are some teachers that are doing very well in this situation, that have learned that they actually love online teaching and that have excelled in it and are happy in their jobs. And I think that that is fantastic and awesome. I just put out a tweet on Twitter that said, "Tell me what boundaries that you've created." And a lot of people have responded with fantastic boundaries that are very possible, obviously, because they're implementing them.
Right. Yeah.
So there are, there are these things that are possible. But I think that there are a lot more teachers who are overwhelmed and tired. And I think, I was just asked yesterday, what is the one thing that I hope teachers take back into their classroom after the pandemic? And I could have said a lot of things, the use of technology and how they use their learning management system and, like all of these things. But what I actually said was, I hope they remember the feeling of not being able to connect with their students in the same way and appreciate the face-to-face connection and relationships that they have. And, again, kind of going back to that second grader, if that second grader hugs you 100 times a day, you appreciate every single hug you got because you went a whole year without them. Or those high schoolers come in and they talk to you and joke with you, during passing period, and you let go of the thinking that you need to be preparing for your next class and just enjoy those moments with the students. That's what I hope people bring back. And so when we talk about migrating back into the classroom and getting into whatever the new normal is, bringing back the appreciation for relationships that are very specific to our profession. Like, we have the opportunity to work with the same people and the same kids for an entire 9 months and get to know them so well and to develop very deep relationships. And so that, we appreciate that. Pedagogically, one thing that I hope that I feel would be a really good transition from what, kind of taking the best things that we've learned from the pandemic and moving back into a classroom would be the actual blended learning. So not what people have been calling blended learning, not the hybrid
Not
learning.
the hybrid. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of misnomers for sure. Yeah.
What
would that look like? Yeah. What would that look like?
Yeah.
Mandy.
So, I am a trainer for Heather Staker's work, who does amazing work in blended learning, and she's got her own, at least one book on blended learning for sure, and a website, lots of videos, and she really has nailed down the flex model of blended learning. And so if you've ever done, for like the listeners, if you've ever done station rotation in your classroom, that is a model of blended learning. And the flex model just really gives you more flexibility in how you schedule the blended learning. And so the benefit of the pandemic is you've been forced to put almost everything online.
Sure.
Well, that's amazing because you have your content online. Don't get rid of that. next year, instead, potentially make a copy of that and keep the course. And then, just as like a very general overview, use that content as your direct instruction, and use the time with your students to pull back, one-on-ones with students to get to know them better, have them use some of that time to work in collaborative groups, have them work independently online. Those are some of the modalities of blended learning.
Right.
I did this in my own classroom years ago, before I even knew what blended learning was. It was just one of the ways that I taught math. And I would pull kids back, either in small groups or in one-on-ones, and have that, I called it intervention time at that time, but really it's just one-on-one meetings.
Sure.
And it's one way that we would be able to migrate easily back into the classroom, and still, and not overwhelm teachers with new information, but instead give them a structure that would help them use what they've been doing and create more opportunities to have relationships with students, which basically puts the two pieces, like we just talked about, relationships and the online part, and put it together.
Right.
The challenge is going to be that what I've found is that, in general, a lot of curriculum people who drive changes like that don't actually know what blended learning is. They have never studied the actual pedagogy of blended learning.
True.
They understand blended learning to be anything that anytime you use tech in the classroom, you're using blended learning. That is wrong.
Yeah.
If anybody in the district's ever told you that,
That's
that's
such
not
a
correct.
generalization.
Yes, absolutely. And so, the challenge being, of course, in a district, making sure that the administration and the people providing professional learning actually know what blended learning is first, and then start to help teachers migrate back into the classroom.
Yeah, I've always said that it would be great to have an educator's glossary, where somehow we all sat down and we defined what is engagement, what is blended learning, what does that all look like? All those buzzwords that we use. I remember my son taught a high school for 2.5 years after doing other jobs or whatever, and he was teaching high school English. And he would come home and he'd say, "What are all these words that they're throwing at me? I don't know what any of them mean," And he was really good at words, but he said, "They keep talking about different things and I just don't get it." So, and I'll make sure to get the information from you about, is it Heather Steger? And the flex model. Yeah. So I'll get that from you after, so I can make sure to put that in the show notes. So, this has been really, really awesome. I hate to just end it, because I've learned so much, and I think our listeners are just going to be like, "How can I get a hold of your book or books?" And it sounds like with what you were talking about at the end, that it seems like a new book, maybe defining blended learning and talking about what would next steps be for curriculum developers and policymakers and district managers or whatever. So maybe that's your next book.
I'm actually working on. Yeah, I don't know. I have mixed feelings. Every time I say I am not writing another book, I end up writing a book. So I'm not going to say that. But the next big project I'm working on, is actually like an organizational structure for resilience, building resilience in your teachers. And so that's been a project that I've been working on for a little bit, and I'm hoping to release that pretty soon. So that'll be coming out.
I'm going to keep you a little bit longer, because I want to know a little bit more about that divergent model. So you said you wrote the book, Divergent. Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about that. What does that look like? And how did you sort of, what was the impetus or the purpose for it? Why did you think it was necessary to sort of look at things that way?
It was actually one of the catalysts for DivergentEDU was also the idea that we need to make teachers something, make teachers, be more innovative. And as a tech integrator, I would sort of walk down the halls and I felt like teachers would like dodge into their classrooms and slam the door and like turn the lights off and hide from me. They didn't, like some of them just didn't want to talk to me. They didn't want to work with me. Yeah. And so I started to, at first I took it personally, right? At first I'm like, what am I doing wrong that people don't want, that certain people don't want
that they're avoiding me. Why are they avoiding me?
Yeah. Yeah. Do I smell like I put deodorant on today? But there was, but there were also people who wanted to work with me. And so whenever that happens, I start to look at the difference between like, what is the actual difference between the two groups? And when I started to look at it, sometimes it was more prevalent in certain schools because I worked in multiple schools. And I started thinking about all of the things that teachers really have going on during a day that have nothing to do with me. And as a tech integrator, have nothing to do even with innovation, sometimes not even technology. And that was actually stopping them from being able to think innovatively. And we talked a little bit about mental health, kind of the same idea. What is reducing their capacity to be able to think innovatively? And in one school, I noticed that one of the biggest issues with the innovative thinking was the climate culture of the school, and also the leadership. And what I decided was there had to be a support structure, and there had to be, like, if I was going to say, issues with innovative thinking are climate and culture and leadership, there has to be a support. And so I kind of came up with this hierarchy, and in the hierarchy, climate and culture is on the bottom. And I've had people say, because all of the bottom, the levels are all supporting up. Okay. So they're all supporting up to innovative thinking. On the bottom, I put climate and culture, and people have regularly said to me, but leadership can determine the climate and culture. And I would say, yes. However, everybody is responsible for the climate and culture. And if we're talking about, supporting up, if you have a good leader that comes into a negative climate and culture, they are going to be trying to fix that climate and culture instead of supporting the other things higher up in the hierarchy. And so, it's climate and culture, leadership, mindset, professional learning opportunities, preferably personalized. And then at the top is the chance for innovative thinking. And within that, there's different pieces of that, right? Like within mindset, there should be, like a learner-centered mindset, understanding, like a growth mindset. Obviously, we talk about within climate and culture, there's teacher engagement. There's, within professional learning, there's how much, teacher agency there is. There's little pieces to each one of those.
Sure, you open it up to all those possibilities. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. But ultimately, you really do support up and so that teachers can be innovative thinkers. At that point, you are providing the support that they need to be innovative thinkers. If they're still not, then that's a separate conversation with that teacher.
Sure.
Because what I find is that administration will try to change some of those things. And when teachers still aren't doing something, that's where the compliance comes in, right? Like they're like, oh, you're not doing X and I'm giving you all the support I can. So now we're going to put a compliance piece on everybody to make sure that one teacher is doing their thing instead of pulling that teacher aside and coaching them. So
that's when I put out a thou shalt.
Yeah.
Yep. I pull them into my office and I say, okay, what's the problem? And if it's basically just a mindset or just a fixed mindset, it's like, well, maybe the fit isn't there. Maybe this isn't, innovation isn't your thing, and that's fine. But then, we really need to be honest. But in the meantime, thou shalt do this, which they don't like very much. But so be it. What happens? Yeah.
And sometimes the idea of innovation for people is very different than, there are times where even the innovative thinking is in mindset, as far as, I mean, you can bring that back to belonging as well. I'm not quote unquote tech savvy, which I hate that word. But I'm not quote unquote tech savvy. So I don't feel like I belong with those teachers who are doing all of these amazing, innovative things. And so instead of trying to figure out how I can be innovative, I'm going to shut down. Right. And I'm going to say, I can't, I can't do that because I'm not tech savvy. I don't like to push buttons. I don't like technology. In fact, I hate it. And then all of a sudden it's, that also could be a feeling of belonging, depending upon how the climate and culture works. So, of course. I mean, there really are.
And sometimes that person is just, afraid and needs the support to pull them out of that fear of, I could raise my hand. I used to be that person. So,
1,000%. And sometimes it's about redefining innovation for that person. Sometimes it's about having the conversation of everybody is on their own journey of innovation. Like you do something else very, very well that nobody else does. And they're still working on that. And so, they're in their own journey, you're in yours. And, there are multiple conversations you can have about that as a leader, but that's kind of what DivergentEDU is based on.
Yeah, and valuing each person for their strengths and understanding. So it's really the leader who needs to get to know their staff, just like the classroom teacher gets to know their students. So, well, this has been really, truly amazing, Mandy. I have to tell you, it's been a wonderful conversation. Is there anything that you wanted to add or any other advice? You've given us so much advice already, but is there anything else that I didn't ask you about that you wanted to talk about before we finish up?
I think I would just like to, well, first of all, thank you for having me on, because I've loved to talk to you. And anytime you want to talk, I am all in. I would love to talk to you as well.
Yes, we definitely have to do a follow-up to this, for sure. Yeah.
I think that one of the things that I've been I don't know if I've been preachy about it lately, but I've been trying to be, is that when we discuss, there's been sort of this bandwagon effect with educator mental health. Everybody wants, we went from nobody wanting to talk about it to a lot of people wanting to talk about it. And my fear and some of the things I've said is that if you are jumping on this bandwagon, you better be ready for the long haul, because there's, the pandemic did not start educator mental health issues. Mental health issues were going on long before the pandemic. The difference being nobody wanted to talk about it. Now people are more open to talk about mental health, gratitude, mindfulness, self-care, the feel-good pieces of mental health. And not a lot of people are still willing to talk about the mental health issues that have been in place. But not only that, are going to be lingering for quite some time.
Yeah, this is a traumatic experience. We have to, we have to cope with that. And that's on top of everything else that teachers suffer from and have suffered from, just like you said, since before the pandemic.
Exactly. And how do a lot of people operate during a traumatic period? A lot of people, again, find those compartments, they stuff, their emotions in, they lock them up. They say, I just need to get through the next 5 minutes. I just need to get through the next 5 minutes. I only have to get through January. I only have to get through February.
Or they shut down.
And we have we have a lot of teachers right now that are locking that stuff up just to get through what they need to get through, which means that when things go back to normal, if they have suffered post-traumatic stress disorder from the pandemic, that's when their symptoms are going to start coming to light, which means that if this was a bell curve, we're not even to the top yet. And so it's really important to start to, I guess, embrace the discussion, get over your fear of talking about mental health issues, start to put practices in place that will support people when we hit the top of that hill, because I don't mean to be all gloom and doom all the time, but it is coming. And I don't think districts are prepared.
Yeah.
So,
and allowing them time and
be
space, to be able to talk about those big emotions.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And providing, can you partner with a community center to have counselors come in 2 to 3 days a week during lunchtime for teachers? Can you really, when was the last time you evaluated your insurance company to see how easy it actually is to get mental health services? Because and not with the people in your human resources department, actual people trying to use the services. Like, how long does it take to get a call from a mental health professional? How many do you have to call? Does the insurance keep their information updated? These are all very practical steps that you can take to support teachers and get ready for that period that's going to be coming down the road.
Yeah. And if we're talking about the new normal, this is something that we really have to set ourselves up for, because if the teachers aren't well, then it's going to be very difficult for them to cope with the students who also have been affected this way, and the parents that they communicate with who have also been affected this way. So if we really want to start somewhere, you're absolutely right, Mandy. We really need to look at this area, which isn't that difficult for districts or schools to take a closer look at. It's easy for them to just say, okay, these are the steps that we need to look at. So yeah, that's a wonderful way to sort of give practical advice for everybody moving forward. Mandy, where can people find you if they want to hop off as they're listening and look for you right away? And of course, I'll include all of this and your books links in the show notes.
Sure. So the most common place to find me is on www.divergentedu.com. And you can find me at Froehlich M on Twitter.
Perfect. Mandy, thank you so much. I don't know how to thank you. I just wish I could just jump through the screen, and I know my listeners are just hearing this, but I can actually see you because we're on Zoom. I'm cheating right now. I usually don't say that, but I would just love to reach through the screen and hug you. Thank you so much. And I know that our listeners will benefit so much from all that you've talked about today.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. And I can't wait until we actually can hug again. I am looking forward to that day. It will be phenomenal. I cannot wait.
Yes, same here. Take care.